So is the government bracing for a decision that's going to see those rates go up this afternoon?
Lisa, the Reserve Bank will do what it thinks is best in accordance with its independent charter. But of course, interest rates have always been going to normalise from their abnormally and historic lows. The 0.1% cash rate is the lowest Australia's ever seen. It's been at that point for 18 months now. We're seeing around the world enormous inflationary pressures. That's putting pressure on interest rates around the world. So far, Australia has managed to avoid the worst of those pressures from overseas, and our plans in economic management is intended to continue to shield Australia from as much of and the worst of those international pressures as is possible. We can't as a nation completely avoid international circumstances or pressures, but we are doing better than most, and our plans are about ensuring Australia continues to do better than that.
Has the government done anything to contribute to the pressure that Australians are feeling at the moment?
Well, Lisa, if anything, what we've shown is a capacity through the crises of COVID-19 to ensure that we kept Australians in jobs at record numbers and well above performance of other nations, that we've got unemployment now down to 50-year lows and the forecast pointing for it to go even lower, and that in the recent budget, what we did when we saw significant budget improvement was that we banked most of that to make sure that we weren't adding to interest rate pressures, but in fact we took some $103 billion and reduced projected deficits, reduced projected government debt levels, ensuring that we were keeping those pressures on interest rates as low as possible.
So the simple answer then is no from you, that the government takes no responsibility for the pressures that Australians are going to be facing, and that Labor's argument that this blows to shreds your economic credibility, you're completely rejecting, are you?
Well, I do completely reject Labor's argument. I don't agree with the summation you gave before that, Lisa. Of course, for mortgage rate holders, increases in interest rates are never something that are welcomed, whilst retirees and others who have savings may have a different view. Ultimately, what we have to do is ensure that we manage an Australian economy that is a significant economy in global terms, and make sure we manage it in a global context where we are buffeted by all sorts of world events, be they the impact of supply chain shocks around the world, the continuing aftershocks of COVID-19, or of course the war in Ukraine, which has had such a huge impact, particularly on energy prices around the world. Now, we understood those pressures were there. It's why in the recent budget, as I said, we made sure we brought down deficit levels, we made sure that we brought down projected debt levels, but we also made sure that we provided a targeted cost of living relief package to Australians, and that was about recognising that these impacts are real and doing what government can to support Australians through that.
Can I take you to this new report from the Climate Council today that shows that 500,000 Australian properties might be uninsurable by 2030, the end of the decade? Does that again give weight to the fact that Australia is just not doing enough to mitigate against these threats?
Well, Lisa, climate change is, of course, a global issue. Now, Australia's emissions reductions are ahead of much of the rest of the world. We've managed to reduce our emissions by 20% since 2005. That's more than Canada, more than New Zealand, many European or other nations. So Australia continues to play our role, and what we've outlined through our technology, not taxes approach is the ability to continue to meet and beat the emissions reductions targets that we have as a nation. But these sorts of reports reflect upon the global trend, which has continued to see countries like China and India and others increasing their emissions, and that's why we'll continue to play our part in terms of trying to reduce Australia's and encourage others to do likewise.
OK, we're talking about within a matter of 7 years, 500,000 Australian properties being uninsurable. So what do you say to Australians facing growing insurance bills right now because of the climate threats that have not been dealt with in the past?
Well, Lisa, as I just said, climate threats are about global emissions levels. Australia's one of the few countries to be bringing our emissions down and to be doing so at the type of rate that we've managed to bring them down. We're one of the few countries where we meet and beat our emissions reduction commitments around the world. Now, of course, impacts of climate change, just as impacts in terms of inflation or interest rates around the world or energy and oil price shocks, these are all things that can buffet economies in countries like Australia. How we respond as a country is most critical to those things. It's where you need to have strong, solid economic plans to make sure that Australians have the opportunities of employment, have the lowest possible taxes, have the abilities to, as best as possible, withstand these types of shocks, be they to insurance prices or be they to energy prices or be they any of the other factors that can rock us from elsewhere around the world.
OK, just finally, the ICAC Commissioner Stephen Rushton has said that the critics of ICAC are buffoons, speaking as they have. That's clearly targeted towards the Prime Minister. I think you've called it a kangaroo court as well. That puts you in that category as a buffoon. Is it time to lay off the criticism of ICAC?
Look, I'm not interested in name calling. I'm interested in the fact that if we embark upon policy reform in these areas, and our government's got several hundred pages of proposed legislation to implement a Commonwealth Integrity Commission, but what we don't want is the type of star chamber model that brings down people like Gladys Berejiklian before even findings are made. We want to make sure that it's a model that applies in a way that provides procedural fairness to all individuals before it.
Yeah, she did resign before appearing before ICAC. So let's just put that on the facts there.
Sure. Whilst, Lisa, all of those matters were being dragged through the public, when indeed you could always conduct these matters through private hearings before you make findings.
Right, OK, so it's still a kangaroo court as far as you're concerned?
I think those types of models that are all about star chamber type approaches, headline grabbing type approaches, they're not about integrity, they seem to be about grabbing headlines. We've proposed a model that absolutely ensures you have an effective integrity commission, has effective powers, but also ensures that it doesn't destroy reputations first and make findings later.
All right, Simon Birmingham, got to leave it there. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Lisa, my pleasure.